Why does humanity seem stuck, trapped in these cycles of conflict? If the goal is that specific 50% less conflict stuff, 25% more cooperation stuff, what are the actual, nuts and bolts? What techniques could a team actually use to build a system like that?
It's a big one.
We put so much effort into diplomacy, into talks.
Endless negotiations, huge resources.
Yeah, exactly. And yet the estimated cost of armed conflict, hostility, it's still hitting something like $17 trillion globally every year.
17 trillion. It's almost impossible to really grasp that number.
It makes you wonder, are we missing something fundamental? Is high-level negotiation the only path, or could there be a completely different way to think about peace? Maybe something more scalable.
Measurable.
Something engineered, perhaps.
We've got some really interesting source materials that look at this from a novel angle.
Right. We'll be looking at how organizations like the XPrize Foundation use these big incentive competitions to tackle massive global challenges.
And then there's this fascinating conceptual proposal for a specific proof of peace XPrize, applying that model directly to conflict and cooperation. And finally, we'll dig into a kind of blueprint,
showing how specific research concepts like the ones discussed in Rational Ruminations transcripts could actually be used as building blocks for a system designed to win that kind of prize.
So our mission today is really to pull out the key ideas from all this. We want to help you get your head around this different approach, thinking about peace not just as something you hope for or negotiate endlessly,
but maybe as a problem you can actually solve with metrics, with scalable systems.
Okay, so let's dive in. We know the traditional methods, diplomacy and all that, they're crucial. But maybe they're not enough on their own.
That $17 trillion figure certainly suggests we need some fresh thinking.
Absolutely. And our sources point towards this idea of the grand challenge, a different way to frame these huge problems. Diplomacy is often, reactive. It can be slow.
And scaling successes is incredibly hard.
Right. So we need systems, maybe, that can proactively build cooperation, systems you can actually deploy more widely, more quickly.
And this is where our first source comes in, talking about the XPrize Foundation. They're kind of a prime example of using this incentive competition model, aren't they?
They really are. Founded by Peter Diamandis way back in '94. He was inspired by things like, Lindbergh's flight across the Atlantic to win the Orteig Prize.
Right. That historical precedent.
Exactly. Diamandis saw how a really clear, ambitious goal tied to a significant cash prize could spark innovation from unexpected places outside the usual channels.
And their mission statement reflects that ambition, doesn't it? Something like, inspire and empower humanity to achieve breakthroughs for an abundant future.
Yeah, it's big picture thinking. But the how is really interesting. Their strategy is key. They only pay the prize money to the team that actually crosses the finish line first.
So it's not like a grant where you fund the research effort itself.
No, you fund the result, the demonstrated success against very specific criteria.
And one of the most compelling things the sources highlight is how this leverages investment. The prize money itself is often just a small part of the total capital that gets poured in.
Oh, definitely. The prize acts like this magnet, pulling in capital, pulling in talent, because there's this clear, measurable goal to shoot for.
It signals credibility to investors.
Right. And it brings in diverse teams, people who might never have thought about tackling that particular problem before.
And they haven't just done space, they've tackled other huge areas too.
Yeah, there was the Automotive X Prize for super fuel-efficient cars, the Qualcomm tricorder, those handheld medical scanners.
And they're still aiming high. That $100 million gigaton carbon removal prize backed by Elon Musk's foundation.
And the HealthSpan X Prize, looking at reversing aspects of aging. They apply this model across incredibly complex fields.
Okay, so how does this connect back to something as, notoriously difficult as global conflict? Why is this model relevant?
Well, because at its heart, the XPR's model is about speeding up innovation, scaling investment, and getting past hurdles by focusing everyone on a clear, measurable outcome. So if you start thinking about conflict and peace, not just as political states, but as problems needing innovative solutions,
Then maybe a grand challenge model could actually work here too.
It's a way to organize global brain power and resources
Yeah.
around achieving a specific verifiable result in this incredibly complex space.
Right. It shifts the focus from how do we keep talking about this to how do we actually solve this with measurable impact, which leads us perfectly into our second source.
The conceptual proof of peace XPrize proposal.
This is where someone took that core XPrize idea and aimed it straight at international relations, cooperation, conflict reduction.
Exactly, the fundamental challenge.
Yeah.
Can we engineer peace in a way that's demonstrable, that's scalable?
And the proposed wording for the challenge itself sounds very XPrize-like. Demonstrate a scalable, evidence-based system that measurably increases cooperative action.
Between two or more sovereign states or recognized ethno-political groups. But the really striking part is the finish line. It's defined quantitatively.
Quantitatively,
For peace.
yeah. To win, a team system would need to achieve a verified 50% reduction in at least 3 specific conflict indicators. And at the same time,
25% increase in at least 3 cooperation indicators.
and this is crucial, sustain those results for 24 straight months.
Wow. Okay, measuring peace, that sounds almost paradoxical, but I see how it fits the model. What kinds of indicators are we talking about? How do you measure conflict reduction?
Well, you'd need to define them for the specific context, but examples could be things like the number of reported armed border incidents.
Or the frequency of hostile cyber attacks attributed to state actors. UN fatality reports from a specific conflict zone. Escalations in sanctions. Even things like documented rises in hate crime stats targeting a specific group, or new trade embargoes being imposed.
So concrete, observable negative events.
Right. You'd pick at least 3 relevant ones for the situation, and you'd have to show that verified 50% drop compared to a baseline.
Okay, that's the conflict side. What about the other side, increasing cooperation by 25%? What measures that?
That would be tracking positive interactions, things like, say, the volume of bilateral trade between the groups.
Makes sense.
Or growth in cross-border student exchanges, the number of joint research patents filed, increases in tourism flowing both ways. Maybe the establishment of shared environmental or public health projects.
Mutual investment flows.
Exactly. Mutual foreign direct investment. Again, you'd pick at least 3 relevant positive indicators and show that sustained 25% increase.
So it's not just about stopping the bad stuff.
No, it's also about actively building the good stuff.
Click subscribe. It's cheaper than hay and twice as fun. That feels important.
It is. And the proposal includes other essential requirements, too. Like, the system has to work in situ, in the real-world context, not just a lab simulation.
Right, on the ground.
Needs third-party audits, using open data, open tech ideally, so the results are really verifiable and transparent. There has to be a playbook for replication.
So others can use it elsewhere. Scalability.
Scalability, exactly. And it needs a plan for financial sustainability beyond just winning the prize money.
The source even throws out some examples of what winning solutions might look like, right? To get people thinking.
Yeah, just archetypes.
Yeah.
Things like AI-mediated joint fact-finding platforms. Imagine an AI helping groups who disagree fundamentally on the facts to actually agree on a common, verifiable dataset.
That could be powerful.
Or concepts like cross-border carbon credit for peace DAOs.
DAOs.
Yeah.
Decentralized autonomous organizations, like blockchain-based groups.
Sort of. Think of it as a way to use new tech to create transparent, automated systems for cooperation. Maybe you tie progress on a joint environmental project, verifiable progress, to something like carbon credits, creating shared incentives.
Okay, so this proof of peace concept really does tick all the XPrize boxes. Clear, measurable finish line.
Designed to pull in capital.
Requires that moonshot thinking.
And potentially huge global impact. Powerful story.
It fits. But it raises the big question, how? If the goal is that specific 50% less conflict stuff, 25% more cooperation stuff, what are the actual, nuts and bolts? What techniques could a team actually use to build a system like that?
And that's exactly where our third source comes in this Rational Ruminations blueprint. What if you could challenge what you believe and come out stronger? Start now at navigatingbeliefs.com. It offers a really interesting angle on that how.
Right, this blueprint looks specifically at transcripts from Rational Ruminations videos.
And argues they contain more than just academic ideas. They contain actionable components, what the blueprint calls building blocks, or even actionable playbooks.
Playbooks for what exactly?
for things like detecting biases, eliciting people's underlying beliefs, de-escalating conflict situations,
Hmm.
techniques rooted in behavioral science, epistemology, communication theory.
Okay.
And the argument is these are precisely the kinds of behavioral tools you need to actually move the needle on those quantitative conflict and cooperation indicators defined in the Proof of Peace Prize.
Let's make that concrete. Can you give an example from the blueprint? How does a video concept translate into a peace-building tool?
Okay, sure. Take the Rational Ruminations video titled, Why We Fight Over Nothing. It looks at how small disagreements blow up because of psychological factors, right?
Yeah.
And it talks about structured questioning, like from street epistemology to de-escalate.
Right, I remember that one. Empathetic questioning.
Exactly. So the blueprint suggests that's a specific de-escalation microprotocol. You could literally code that questioning logic into, say, an AI mediation bot used at a tense checkpoint.
Or in an online dialogue platform between divided groups.
Precisely. And by using that protocol to diffuse those petty conflicts before they escalate, you could directly reduce a conflict indicator, like the number of border incidents.
Ah, I see. Connecting the micro technique to the macro metric. What about the video from ethical fading to awareness? How does that fit?
That one's about how we, or organizations, can slowly drift into unethical behavior by making lots of small, rationalized compromises ethical fading.
Okay.
So the blueprint proposes using those insights to design like early warning systems, norm slippage dashboards within governments or cross-border organizations.
Dashboards?
Yeah, systems that track and visualize subtle deviations from agreed norms or treaty obligations by making that drift visible early before it becomes a major violation or crisis.
Now, you could potentially prevent escalations, head off conflict indicators before they spike.
Exactly. It's about proactive prevention based on understanding that psychological drift.
Very interesting. Okay, so that's reducing conflict. What about boosting cooperation? The blueprint mentioned the elicitation trilogy videos.
Right. Those videos go really deep into structured methods for helping people articulate why they believe something, their underlying reasoning, values, assumptions.
Okay, elicitation.
The blueprint argues these techniques provide ideal facilitation prompts for things like cross-border citizen assemblies or joint working groups.
How so?
Well, instead of people just repeating grievances, these techniques could help them uncover shared values or expose hidden assumptions that are blocking progress. It pivots the conversation towards finding common ground, generating actual roadmaps for joint projects.
Which directly feeds into increasing cooperation indicators like joint research or environmental initiatives.
Bingo. And there's another one, the belief isn't the problem, it's the reasoning behind it. That seems tailor-made for measurement.
Huh.
That video analyzes different qualities of reasoning, how well-supported, consistent, or fallacy-free someone's arguments are. The blueprint suggests you could actually develop a reasoning improvement KPI based on that.
A key performance indicator for reasoning quality.
Yeah. In workshops or dialogues, you could track whether the quality of the reasoning being used by participants is improving over time, using a rubric derived from the video's concepts. Showing improvement in the process of discussion could correlate with and contribute to hitting that 25% increase in cooperation outcomes.
So you're measuring the improvement in how people are talking and thinking together.
Exactly. And the blueprint touches on others too, using insights from the dual mind to design better integration programs, or from ethical truth-telling to shape the rules for AI dialogues to ensure they feel fair and safe.
It's really about taking these quite sophisticated behavioral and philosophical ideas.
And then translating them into practical tools and measurable interventions. The blueprint explicitly maps them. Things like micro-escalation interrupts.
While things like citizen assembly kits using elicitation or a reasoning quality index aim at boosting cooperation.
It even sketches out a possible system. Maybe an initial diagnostic phase using dual mind ideas, then a dialogue engine using rules from truth-telling and petty conflicts, and an ongoing audit tracking things like reasoning scores towards the XPI's targets.
So the blueprint's core argument is that these rational ruminations transcripts offer a kind of ready-made behavioral toolkit.
Pretty much. A rigorously sourced layer of behavioral science and communication techniques that speaks directly to the quantitative goals of something like the Proof of Peace XPrize. It tries to bridge that gap between messy human dynamics and measurable peace engineering.
Okay, let's try and tie all these threads together then. We started with this huge, persistent problem conflict and its massive cost.
And the search for new ways forward.
Then we looked at the XPrize model, this proven framework for using incentive prizes to drive breakthrough innovation on really big problems.
Right, the grand challenge approach.
Then we zeroed in on the conceptual proof of peace challenge, applying that model specifically to international cooperation, crucially defining success with clear, measurable targets for reducing conflict and increasing cooperation.
The 50% reduction, 25% increase metrics.
And finally, we explored how specific research concepts, like those analyzed in the Rational Ruminations blueprint, could offer concrete behavioral tech, actual methods and protocols.
That teams could potentially weave into a system designed to actually meet those tough, measurable goals.
It really does feel like a potential shift in perspective, doesn't it? Moving beyond seeing peace only as a result of political negotiation.
And starting to frame it, at least partly, as something you could engineer. Through scalable systems, using measurable data, drawing on behavioral science, maybe AI, other new tech.
Identifying the underlying human dynamics driving conflict or cooperation.
And designing specific interventions to shift those dynamics, then proving it with data.
And this matters to you listening because it shows how insights from really different places, detailed psychological analysis in videos, the mechanics of prize design can potentially come together to tackle enormous global challenges.
It suggests that even something as complex, as deeply human as international conflict, might be breakable into parts we can measure and address with innovative, maybe unexpected approaches.
It encourages thinking about these huge challenges, not just as inevitable conditions, but maybe as solvable problems with verifiable outcomes.
So we've covered a lot of ground. From the staggering cost of conflict
Through the XPrize model's power,
to the specific metrics of the proof of peace concept.
and down to the detailed behavioral components suggested by the Rational Ruminations blueprint.
It's a whole stack from the macro problem down to the micro techniques.
Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought to chew on. If we can start measuring progress towards peace, not just by the absence of violence, but by tangible increases in cooperative action, and maybe even by improvements in how we communicate and reason together, does that suggest that maybe the ultimate key to engineering a more peaceful world lies less in arguing over what we disagree about, and more in improving the fundamental processes of how we talk, how we understand each other, and how we cooperate?
Until next time.